Half an hour after Edgar remarked on the rubble, a column of trucks, light tanks and jeeps reached Sceptic Tower. All day soldiers engaged in vicious house-to-house fighting, with die-hard toasters, kettles, washing machines, etc., etc. We could hear the sound of gunfire and hand grenade detonations all around the tower. Where resistance was particularly stiff, buildings would be strafed by attack helicopters or shelled by artillery batteries set up in car parks and open spaces 3 or 4 kilometers away. If that failed to do the trick, whole streets were flattened by 100,000-pound high-explosive bombs dropped by fighter bombers. The same sort of military operations were going on all over the world as humans fought to reclaim their towns and cities. Edgar and I watched the fighting from his office. Little columns of smoke ascended from windows where soldiers dispatched electronic appliances. The wounded we had looked after were evacuated by army ambulance to Hyde Park, where a massive emergency aid camp had been set up. Policemen, all heavily armed, arrived by the afternoon. 4 of them sat outside Sceptic Tower on the rubble that had once been the statue of the Virgin Mary, and talked and told jokes. More truckloads of soldiers drove past Sceptic Tower all evening, as did dump trucks, which were used to collect the mutilated bodies that were all over the place. By mid-morning of the next day, the dump trucks and the soldiers had gone. Only police and weeping insurance men could be seen on the streets. It was then that Edgar and I heard an almost imperceptible sound, the sound of the dials above Edgar's almost three-dimensional map of the world starting to turn. Betting in the countless metaphysical betting shops around the world had started up again, and slowly things began to return to something approaching normality. Sophia began talking of God giving humanity one final chance, and, unobserved by anyone apart from Dr. Cunningham behind the one-way mirror, shunted the red marker that represented the end of the world along her wall chart a little. Over 50 million people had been killed, nearly as many as had died in the Second World War. It was agreed by just about everyone that the belief in God built into the Infinity Chip had been the cause of the Great Mania, and they redoubled their attempts to trace Thomas Duncombe, who had gone into hiding since the Ding Dong 7 incident. No one knew where he was. The El Benno Corporation was promptly sued by just about everyone on the planet for murder and for post-traumatic stress disorder, and the largest transnational in the world was declared bankrupt in a very short space of time. The stock market crashed, as it had done when George Mills Jr. had passed away. Leonard Duncombe, the owner of the El Benno Corporation and Thomas Duncombe's father, publicly disowned his son again. Leonard Duncombe then went back to his ancestral home in Venice and wrote a short treatise on why God cannot exist, because there is so much stupidity and religion in the world. After writing this treatise, Leonard Duncombe committed suicide by slitting his wrists with the broken head of the porcelain cat he had been buying when he had bumped into the woman who became his wife. The porcelain cat was the conversation piece by which the two had become acquainted. Aloha. Leonard Duncombe's collection of porcelain cats, the second largest such collection in the Northern Hemisphere, and valued at 1.5 million, was smashed to smithereens by grief-stricken Italians. Everyone said that George Mills Jr. was turning in his grave, and of course he was. Every single chain of supermarkets went to the wall. People couldn't bring themselves to enter such places. It brought back too much pain. I was the only conscious supermarket trolley left alive on the planet. In fact, I was the only conscious electrical appliance left alive on the planet. Edgar kept me hidden away on the higher floors of Sceptic Tower, where he and only his most trusted staff ever saw me. I owe Edgar Malroy my life. There is little doubt of that. In addition to Thomas Duncan and the Jehovah's Witnesses, some people blamed George Mills Jr. for inventing the infinity chip in the first place. Just how, still no one knew. An electromagnetic transmission, broadcast on the same wavelengths as this one, was sent out into space from the world's largest radio telescope, the Arecibo in Puerto Rico, in roughly the same direction as the transmission sent out 6 years earlier during George Mills Jr.'s lavish funeral service. It went as follows. George Mills Jr. invented the infinity chip. 6 years later, and 50 million people are dead. We just thought you ought to know. Other people blamed the weather.